Hey everyone, welcome to another In Conversation. I am so excited to be joined by Dr. Jessica Knurick today. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I first and foremost, as I told you before we started, I'm so grateful for you and your content and everything that you share with the general public, especially in a time that is very scary for a lot of people right now. We are, I had been saying we're entering into a dangerous era, but we're fully in it in this moment. And with democracy being threatened and the rights of people being threatened, science and medicine are also being threatened. And people that have dedicated their lives to this field are being discredited by this administration left and right. And we've seen everything from funding being cut to people losing their jobs to websites being erased. I mean, the list goes on, right? And for you, as someone who is a doctor that has dedicated your life to this field and has done all of this work, this is kind of a big question, but what is one of your biggest fears, given that we're only 3 months into this administration?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now. So I'm going to repeat. Sorry, I know our internet's a little stable, but what is one of your
Okay.
biggest
No,
fears?
I think I heard you. I think it was what is one of your biggest fears right
Yeah,
now with this
it's
administration. Is
especially
that
because we're
right?
only 3 months in. So what is one of your biggest fears?
Yeah. Well, as you know, I tend to really focus on the science and public health side of things when I'm talking about this administration in particular, and so I'm going to answer that from that lens as
Mhm.
well. One of my biggest fears from the science perspective is a loss of not only standing in the world in terms of where we are from a science perspective, we've always led the world with our research institutions, but a real loss of our young scientists. So I've spoken with a lot of people who follow me are PhD students or they're early stage scientists or early career scientists, and I hear from them all the time that they're looking for work elsewhere, that they're looking to leave. Their whole PhD class is looking, for work internationally, and I think that's a real tragedy. If we were to lose kind of a generation of scientists, that could be a real problem for us.
Mm.
So that's definitely a big fear that I have. Another big fear is just right now, their goal, and we always knew this. I mean, the Trump administration ran on kind of decimating our federal agencies, right? Like this is not surprising to anybody who's been paying attention that this is happening. The speed and the veracity. And we just have so many examples of how it's not just waste that's being gotten rid of, right? We have, I mean, news articles come out all the time about this really important research group that was cut and this really
Yeah.
important scientist that was cut, and then obviously the grant funding as well, and the funding for institutions and public health programs. Even in the Republican budget bill, the idea that we're going to cut billions of dollars from things like Medicaid and nutrition assistance for low income populations, in order to fund tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and for
Mhm.
corporations. I mean, I think all of that is just from a public health perspective, a real tragedy, and that's what I'm worried about the most for sure.
I hadn't considered the people that follow you that saying they're looking for other work, that it's because of the uncertainty of the field, right? They're wanting
Yeah.
to go in, and they're probably wanting to go into this for all of the good reasons. I mean, you don't choose this field unless you want to help, unless you want to make a difference, unless this is something that you care about. And what has been frustrating for me to see is that a lot of people that are taking specifically RFK juniors, they have no background in this field whatsoever. And so I can't imagine how it must feel for you, for someone who did the work, went to school, got your PhD, and now to see somebody at the head of HHS, HHS, that has no credibility whatsoever.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the head of HHS doesn't necessarily need to be a scientist, and historically they have been, attorneys and lawyers who have worked kind of in public health. So they have an understanding of policy, like public health policy. But
Yeah.
those, if you look historically at those leaders and that leadership, they rely on scientists, and
Yeah.
they rely on experts in their field. A lot of people will tell me, and I'm grateful for it. Like, thank you when people are like, "Oh, I wish you were our HHS secretary," and I always laugh because I'm like, guys, I wouldn't be qualified to be the HHS secretary. I know that sounds ridiculous with where we are right now, right? But if I were in that position, I would be relying on people who are experts in their field, and so that I think is the biggest
Yeah.
difference. It's like we're not seeing that. We're not seeing him bring in, respective experts from all of these different areas in order to help. He's kind of like taking it on himself with no expertise. So when people do give pushback, like they're like, well, HHS secretary has never been a medical doctor or a scientist. Yes, but they always have relied on medical doctors and scientists in their respective fields, and we're not seeing that.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad that you made that clarification because it's a team effort, obviously, and you can see that there just isn't
Yeah.
any efforts to put the right people in place. I mean, we've been seeing the top people be fired because there are points of contention with what he wants to do with the department. It's been really, really disappointing to see. There's obviously a lot being shared, and I'm sure that there's things that are being missed by the general public because they are flooding the zone with information across the board with immigration, with education, and with public health. Is there anything that you feel like people haven't focused on that you think is very important but hasn't gotten the media attention that it actually needs?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I think you're right. I went last month to the Hill to Washington D.C. and I spoke with a lot of members of Congress. And it is difficult because that is the goal. That is their goal, is to flood the zone, right? And to just do so much that you can't keep track of it all. So like I can't even fault people for not caring that our scientific institutions are being decimated and not understanding like the repercussions of that, right? Because they're dealing, they're focusing on like all of these other
Right.
things that are happening. So yeah, there's a lot that I think people are missing, and that's kind of what I try to do with my content. Is I try to make sure that I'm like hyper focused. Like I really
Mhm.
focus on what's happening with public health, what's happening with our like science in general, and kind of bring that to people's attention a little bit more, because they do things under the radar. I just did a video last week on the administration is trying to, they're very pro corporation, this administration. And so
Right.
they're trying to kind of help corporations and reduce a lot of like our environmental regulations, right? The new EPA, head of the
Mhm.
EPA said they were ushering in the greatest era of deregulation of all time. So they're rolling back lots of different clean. And one of the things that they're doing with PFAS, which are commonly referred to as forever chemicals, is they're using kind of like really regulatory language, like and they're doing it through like rule making. So it's very not obvious what they're doing. They're not just saying, okay, like we're gonna let corporations just add more PFAS or use or pollute with more PFAS. But what they're doing is and it's very complicated how they're doing it. But essentially, they're changing the rules so that states cannot now make their own decisions based on PFAS.
Interesting.
So they have to just for right now we regulate a chemical like that as a whole thing. What they want to do is they want to say, okay, well, we're going to look at individual uses, and if one use is deemed safe, then it's all deemed safe. And you, as a state, are no longer allowed to regulate this chemical by itself. So, right now, we have states like California and Colorado and New York that all regulate these things at a state level. And so they're much stricter than we are federally. And those states would no longer be allowed to regulate PFAS. And so that's
Huh.
see how hard that was for me to explain, and I didn't even
Yeah.
explain the whole thing. So that's what they're doing as well. It's not just like in your face stuff. It's like kind of like behind the scenes stuff that you don't
Right.
even realize. And then, you see on the back end, let's talk about heavy metals for a second, right? We nobody wants heavy metals in our food and our water supply.
Sure.
There's studies that have come out that show that it's in that heavy metals, like when I say heavy metals, I'm talking about like mercury, arsenic,
Mhm.
lead. That they find lead in like almost nearly everybody's breast milk samples that they test for. Right? We don't want that. And so, what can we do to stop that? Well, we need to do more than just be like mad at the corporations when they find levels of lead that are, by the way, within standards that we regulate for. We need to look at the source, and the
Mhm.
source is environmental pollution. And so one of the biggest sources of heavy metals in our air soil or in our soil and water is coal.
Huh.
This big push that we're going to start burning more coal. Well, that will lead to more heavy metals in our soil and water. And so that's what I really try to do is I try to help people make those connections. Like, okay, yeah, we're going to burn more coal. Yes, maybe that's great for I'm not sure, like, because I'm not that's not my area of expertise what that's
Right.
great for. But what I can tell you is what it's not so great for, which is more heavy metals in our soil and water.
Right. I also find it interesting that how they're picking and choosing what the states can be in charge of and what the states can't be in charge of. So it's interesting that they
Yeah.
would make this, they would
Yeah,
make
because
this.
aren't they all about states' rights?
That's what I'm saying. That's why I was like blown away because I hadn't heard this. And so hearing this from you, I'm like, huh, I wonder what their justification is for making this a federal thing and not allowing it be to the states when the states have been doing this in the first place. Thank you for sharing that information. That is very, very fascinating to me. Um, I want to shift gears a little bit because I know you've posted about this quite a bit about the Make America Healthy movement and Healthy Again movement. And obviously, it sounds great in theory. I think nobody would disagree that we should make America healthy, and there are right ways to do that. But I would love for you to point out some of the flaws in that movement because there are quite a few of them, and you've made some really great videos about them. But maybe for people that haven't seen those videos, I just love for you to share.
Yeah, so I think the Make America Healthy Again movement is a political movement, and a lot of people like to say that it's not, and it absolutely is. It's a political movement based on this idea that I 100% agree with. I mean, just to give some background, I don't know that I mentioned who I am, but I have a PhD in nutrition science, and my research trajectory was really in chronic disease prevention. So I was looking at the prevention of cardiometabolic disease, namely type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, right? So two of the biggest chronic diseases that we see.
Yeah.
And so, I obviously, having done this, having dedicated my adult life to this, am all for making Americans healthier, like absolutely, and that's what I've studied my whole adult life. The thing is that so what they did was they really tapped into this idea that like okay, Americans are struggling with chronic disease and with these conditions, and our food environment does suck. Like if you look at our food environment, I mean it's about 70% ultra processed foods.
Yeah.
It's not, you go into a grocery store, there's like thousands of options, and most of them are not that great for you, right? They're really high in calories or sugar, and low in nutrition, low in fiber, low in nutrients. And we so in those aspects they were able to use that messaging, I think, to tap into these concerns from a lot of people in a bipartisan way. Where I differ, and where most of my colleagues differ with the Make America Healthy Again movement, is their fixation on certain things that are causing these problems,
Mhm.
without recognizing the things that are actually causing these problems. And so the best way, sorry, I'm dealing with like a little laryngitis, so
No
I'm working my
worries.
way through it.
No worries. You're
The
doing
best way
great.
that I could explain this is like if I made a list of 10 things that were like the biggest factors in our public health in the United States, what they're focusing on, which are mostly food additives, artificial food dyes, seed oil, things, um, that would be at the very bottom of that list, right? And so if you have a movement that's really focused on the 99% of the list or 90% of the list, that's where the biggest issue comes in with this particular movement, and why I think it's so disingenuous, the movement.
Yeah, yeah. It also ties into what my next question is, and then I'm going to go back to ask you another thing. But um, in this kind of information ecosystem that we're in currently, I really want to get your opinion on this. I know that influencers are becoming sources of information. And I know, like for myself, for example, I'm a performer, but I started getting very, very heavy into political activism many, many years ago. And people do come to me for as a news source or to hear my opinions. And I don't consider myself a journalist. I don't, try to subscribe to that whatsoever. And I still really, really believe in what journalists do. And I watch the news all the time. But a lot of people are looking at influencers specifically for their information. And in the health and wellness space, they're looking to them for even science information. And I'm curious what you think about that, because I think it kind of ties into the Make America Healthy movement as well, because you see a lot of, health and wellness influencers really subscribing to this movement as well. And I think it personally can be very dangerous because they aren't accredited in this field, and I think that it's very easy for people to express misinformation and to not share in good with good intentions, right? So I'm just curious how you think influencers play a part into the information ecosystem, specifically when it comes to health and wellness and science.
Oh, I mean, they play a huge part right now. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. Social media is where, for better or worse, people are going for information, right? And so, for a very long time, and I kind of have a personal story about this too, but for a very long time, it was really frowned upon for experts in these fields to go on social media.
Mm.
So when I was a professor, I graduated professor around like 2016, 2017. I was like, let me go online and teach about nutrition because that was like my bread and butter. I was like, let me go on and like go on social media and teach about nutrition. And so that's what I kind of started doing. I started like dipping my toes in and like being like, okay, let me go on. And I got so much negative feedback from my
Oh,
colleagues, and so many of them kind of like made fun of me. And I had a couple of people tell me to stop doing it. And so again, this was 2016, 2017. We're, 8 years later, but we're definitely in a different place now. But that was very prevalent back then. And
hmm.
at that same time, a lot of influencers were getting online, right? And so we kind of lost a lot of footing by not embracing social media early enough. Scientists, medical professionals not getting on. And so the space has really been dominated, particularly in nutrition and kind of health, by influencers, right? People who aren't, doing the work. They're not in the lab. They're not, they're not teaching. They're not doing, or they're not in like their medical profession. And so again, that's changed. And it's much more embraced now. And so more and more of us are on. But I think that was a big problem.
Ah,
Another problem is that being a wellness influencer can be very lucrative, right? So it's worth it to spend. I mean, making content, this is a lot of work.
yeah.
And the only way I've been able to do it in full like honesty is because my husband makes enough money for us. And so that's how I was able to work part time and put so much time into social media, making very, very little money, no money for years, and then very little money, because it's not as lucrative to be a science communicator on this platform because you have to be very careful about affiliations and taking brand deals and things like
Right,
that, much
right,
more so than if I was just selling supplements and taking all these brand deals.
right.
And so I think that's a really big problem for us in the science communication space. And I talk to some, I mean, I talk all the time with other science communicators about this, and there's a lot of burnout because there's not that kind of like upside to doing it, and at the same time you get a lot of hate
Yeah.
from people who have for years just been kind of watching. They get into these algorithms and they distrust scientists and medical professionals, and they think everything you're saying is bought and paid for when it's actually the opposite.
Wow.
So I think that's very hard. So I do think that we're in kind of this space. And again, I do think it's shifting. More and more people I've seen, I mean, I've been really encouraged that there's a ton of misinformation out there, but I think that people are like really interested in this topic for the first time, maybe, or at least the most I've ever seen. Actually, like learning and wanting to understand like what is the truth here.
Right.
And so I've seen a huge like increase in my following since the election, even. And I do think that's encouraging. It means that people are interested in caring about kind of like another side, an evidence-based side, like hearing from the professionals in this field.
That's interesting that it was frowned upon back then because I would think using social media to get information out to the general public would be encouraged. So it's interesting to hear that you got some pushback in doing that because a lot of people don't go to websites, they don't watch the news, and social media truly just is their source for all information, no matter what is happening in the world. So I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that I've been following you for such a long time. So I think that's wonderful that it's making a shift. I do. I think
Yeah.
that that's great. The other day, and I saw you posted about it. I posted about it as well. We all were pretty shocked to hear RFK Jr.'s statements on autism. And as someone who has many autistic friends and has friends that have autistic children, seeing their hurt from those statements was really difficult, and I really tried as much as I could to hold space for them and be there for them because it was hard to hear. I would love for you to just define what autism is because he very incorrectly called it a disease. And also, if you could talk a little bit about, if you know, because I personally don't know where the misinformation that vaccines cause autism comes from. But if you happen to know the origin, I would really love for you to share that with people and also why it's not true.
Yeah, I mean, so autism is a neurotype, right? It's a neurodevelopmental condition. It's certainly not a disease. And I think a lot of people who study this space specifically have done a really nice job of explaining the difference and why. Um, the idea that autism um, is caused by vaccines comes from back in the 90s, a paper by a guy named Andrew Wakefield, who published a paper, and I don't exactly remember the what exactly the paper was about, but what I can tell you is it was found later on. He published it. It was a big thing back then. It caused a lot of interest from the
Mhm.
scientific community because it was like, oh my gosh, this landmark paper. Like we're going to have to look more into this. And it was found that he falsified the data, and the paper was retracted. He lost his license. And it was, I mean, this is like very well known, but that is where it started. I
Wow.
mean, there may have been like rumblings before that. Paper that has come out similar to that ever, and so that's where it got started. There's just an incredible amount of data to show the opposite of that. Realizes in the scientific community, if we found links, if links were found, we would be investigating that. Like that's
Yeah.
not something that we just be there's no reason for us to try to hide that. I mean,
Right.
when I was, for example, when I was doing my PhD, the diabetes prevention program came out, and because that was kind of my field, my area, that came out right before, and it showed that a structured diet and exercise regimen outperformed metformin. And we ran with that. It was like, yes, lifestyle can outperform these medications. Like that's what we try to do on
Hmm.
our end in like kind of the prevention science space. And so that would be done in science. And I'm not sure why this idea that like we would be like scientists would be hiding this. It just is not the case.
Right.
There's a wealth of data to show that vaccines do not cause autism. But that's where it got its start, was with Andrew Wakefield.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that because I wasn't sure, and I've always heard that, but known that it's not true. So thank you for giving me the origins in that.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I know there's a lot of, obviously, as we said, misinformation and honestly disinformation as well. But what are some credible sources that you can share that people can look into, that they can trust, that are sharing information that you may not be able to get because of how much the administration is, the lengths that they're going to kind of keep the general public from knowing things when it comes to science and medicine?
Okay, I think I am having a little connection issue. I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
no worries.
I'm
I'll say
not
that
sure
again.
why.
No
I always
worries.
sit
No
here.
problem. No
Can you
problem.
repeat your question for me?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, because we're in a world of misinformation and disinformation, it's hard to know what sources to trust. Do you have sources that you can share with us as the general public that we can always refer to when we want to know information specifically in this field?
Yeah, so what I would say is, in the science space and the nutrition space and that sort of thing, it's really helpful to follow experts. So I get asked a lot of questions. I think we're very used to on social media, find somebody we trust, and then we go to them with all of our questions.
Right.
And that's not really the best approach, right? So even our conversation with autism just now, like I know the basics of autism, but I would never purport to be an expert in that area. And I would refer you, if you were asking me like more questions than that, I would refer you to an expert in that area.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important to do. So look for people who are willing to do that, right? When people ask me like specific vaccine safety questions, that's not my area. So I refer out to, immunologists, microbiologists, vaccinologists, people who study that specific area because they can
Yeah.
really delve into that. So I think look for people who are experts in their field. I have a PhD in nutrition science, and I've studied nutrition science and public health and how policy relates to our food environment. I'm a really great person to come to for that, right? Other there's a lot of great like nutrition people in here. There's also a great pediatrician, what are they called? What are we called? Creators.
Content
So
creators.
a
Yes.
lot, yeah, I'm like, what? What's that word for us online? Yeah, creators. So I think, and then obviously you have to be like, there has to be a little bit of um, a connection there. So I do think that it's really important for us as creators to be really clear about like what's our expertise, what's outside of our expertise. I think that does help to build trust with people. And then also, I get told a lot like, oh, you would be more trustworthy if you showed what this party is doing right for public health right now.
Hmm.
And I so I try, this is kind of tough for me to walk through, but I try really hard to identify when there are positive things, right? So
Yeah.
that's not very easy right now in public health, in the
Right.
public health sphere. But for example, like with RFK Jr., there are some things I agree with about him. Now on the whole, like these little things I agree with are certainly not worth it. But I'm willing to say that, like, for example, if we could close the grass loophole, I know a lot of people probably won't know what that is, but it's this designation of generally recognized as safe for food additives in our food environment. I'm all for that. Like, let's close the grass loophole, and that's something that he said. So I think it's really important to kind of be really transparent and stay true to kind of like your message too, right? Like
Mhm.
so just because RFK is saying something that I agree with, I'm not going to just disagree with it because he says it, right? I'm going to be
Right.
like, okay, I agree with that as well. Specific people to actually follow. I mean, I have in my Instagram, if you go to my Instagram, I have a follow highlight with some
Oh,
awesome
nice.
science communicators that
Great.
I would just highly recommend. They're wonderful. And then from a news perspective, a lot of people are like, where do you go for your news? I try to find some like trusted news sources and then just like follow them. I don't watch like mainstream media. I don't get
Yeah.
caught up in like all of that because I just think you can't, our brains like aren't wired to handle it,
Yeah.
So I try, like I love Jessica Yellen. I
Yes.
follow her. She has like news, not noise. And so she'll tell you like if something's noise. And so like people
Right.
like that I think are really helpful.
Yeah, Jessica's a very good friend, and I co-sign that. She's incredible. I really love the work that she does. This is a loaded question, but it's one I like to end with because I think it's important because it's easy to get bogged down by everything that's happening. But what's one thing that is bringing you hope or joy right now? Just one thing that's bringing you hope or joy. And I know it's hard. I know it's hard sometimes, but just one thing that's bringing you hope or joy right now.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that final question. Um, Let me think for a second. Let's see, what's bringing me I mean, my easiest answer would be my children. I have a 5
Yeah.
and a 2-year-old, and they just bring me a world of joy. They also bring me a lot of, like, stress. Um, but yeah, a lot of joy there. Um, and also, I guess, let me just stay on topic. I kind of mentioned this, but one of the things that is bringing me hope is the amount of people, I think, who are paying attention to policy and how policy and public health is
Mhm.
impacted by policy for the first time.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people haven't ever really paid attention to this, and now they're like really interested, and that's one
Mhm.
thing that the Make America Healthy Again movement has really brought. And so if we could just bring some of those people in, who are actually interested now, but have only heard kind of the Make America Healthy Again side of it. And I've heard from a lot of people that, sometimes they'll see my account for whatever reason, it'll land on their, what do they call it? On their
The
For You
feed,
page or
their
whatever it
feed
is.
or for yeah.
Yeah, their feed. And they're like, oh my gosh, I just like never had the opportunity to hear like a counterpoint to any of this.
Wow.
And I'm so like thankful to hear your side of it, and I think that that's really encouraging. So I would like to kind of like play off of this like encouragement and this motivation that people have to actually learn about these topics right now. So that's bringing me hope.
I love that. I love that. I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much for your time. I really love learning from you. And I hope that everyone that is listening follows you and just keep doing what you're doing because it's needed. It's vital information and you are a very important voice right now.
Thank you, I so appreciate it, and I'm
Uh,
so sorry if there's connection issues.
no worries. We had a great convo. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Okay, great.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.